the president has turned this thing into a video game. I'm not saying that to score political points. I mean, he literally has White House staff trying to turn this into video games and making memes and talking about working their little hearts off making memes instead of focusing on war planning. And I had dinner tonight with Gulf state representatives. I'll tell you what our allies think in the region. They think that the president shouldn't have gone to this war. They tried to convince him not to continue the buildup in the region and not to go to war because they warned the consequences could be catastrophic. Some of these are countries who, by the way, they're no fans of Iran. They wanted to see Iran weakened, but they knew what could happen would be worse. And now they see a president who doesn't know what he's doing, who's constantly moving the goalposts, whose own staff isn't even sure what he's doing. That's pretty scary to me. The president sees this as, again, a video game, not what it is, a matter of life and death that affects not just the United States, but the entirety of our world.
Scott, is that unfair? I mean, to say we're going to bomb our little hearts out? I mean,
it would be fine with me if we continue to bomb them. These are the worst people in the world. They've been at war with us for 47 years. They want nuclear weapons. By the way, the reason that they're saying there are no talks while the president is saying there are is because they lie all the time. They sent their people out in February to say, oh, we would never have long-range missiles. We have no plans. And then what do we find out this weekend? They got 4,000-kilometer range missiles that can reach most of Europe. They lie all the time. That's what the Iranians do. They're terrorists. They hate us. We're the great Satan. Israel's the little Satan. We could wipe them off the face of the earth and it would be fine with me. But if the president achieves no nuclear weapons, no ballistic missile program, and an end to the largest state sponsor of terror on the face of the earth, that'll be a good outcome. So I hope he gets it. I'm glad he's working towards a diplomatic solution. They say he might be talking to this Speaker of the Iranian parliament. I don't know how it works over there now because we killed so many of their top guys. Maybe the left hand doesn't know who the right hand's talking to.
I agree with you. The leaders of the Iranian regime, they lie. I think the problem is we don't know if our president is also telling the truth. And so it feels like there are two bad actors in this case. And I am confused. I really don't know. I want my president to be honest.
You're equating the American president to the Iranian regime?
No, that's not what I did. And
you said two bad actors.
But two bad actors don't have to be the exact same type of bad actors. One is a little bad, one is a little worse. I don't know.
For America.
I am cheering for America,
Okay.
but America can only win if we're honest. And I don't know if our president is being honest with us because they haven't been honest since the beginning of this war. They didn't
About what?
About what they actually want. Now it's just nukes. Before I thought it was regime change. Are they talking to him?
They said repeatedly,
He
nukes,
says
terrorism,
nope. He
Navy.
said nope. He said the Israeli government didn't tell them they were going to strike the liquid gas reserves. Then they say it is. It's just every day it's something else. So I'm allowed to be skeptical of the truth.
Brad, go ahead.
Well, I think it's depressing that we can't get to a point where we can't all agree that Iran, without a ballistic missile program and without its ability to run a proxy network in the region and wreak havoc, that's an unequivocal good thing. There is nothing bad about it.
I'm not hearing that at this table.
That's not what anybody's saying.
I'm not hearing the idea that Iran is not a bad actor at this table so far. Now, one thing I am hearing, and I mean, Brad, weigh in on this, and this was a question that I put to Chris Van Hollen. The Wall Street Journal editor-at-large, Gerard Baker, said this today. The unsettling reality is that with this president, Americans in wartime are in the unprecedented position of having to suspect that the enemy's version of events is more likely to be true than our own. We have become Baghdad Bob.
Of course, no one's admitting they're talking to the President of the United States because that'd be a good way to be hung by a crane tomorrow if you're a person in the Iranian government. The Iranian government is not just a bad actor. They terrorize and murder their own citizens, much less anybody who might cut a deal with the United States. So I think we ought to trust the American president about what America's interests are.
But hasn't the president been inconsistent? Do you feel like there's been a straight line from the first strike to right now? And if you say it with a straight face.
I wish he would do less color commentary and less play-by-play. Instead of talking 6 times a day to the press on this, I wish he'd talk once a week.
And then probably why you want him to talk less than 6 times to the press is because when he talks, he doesn't say the same thing every time. Which can lead some people to think he's not telling the truth.
He's offering too many different objectives, and I think that less access would help that.
But the objectives are all worthy. You don't want Iran to continue to be a state sponsor of terror. You don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, especially now that we know they have missiles that can land all over Europe and soon, who knows where else. You don't want them to have an aggressive Navy, which they have had for years. These have been consistent objectives, and as Brad said, if you achieve these things out of this, whatever the regime or something else looks like at the end, that is a good thing. They have been at war with us and all of Western civilization for 47 years. We are way overdue for this. They need to be dealt with, and he finally had the guts to do it. So at the end of this, if we achieve those things I just laid out, you would agree that would be, the world would be a better place, yes?
I've got to agree with Scott, your point about the objectives. You and I both agree. Iranian regime, bad regime, dangerous regime,
Everyone
killed
does.
Americans, terrible regime. The reason you want to be consistent about your strategy is depending on what opening move you make, it affects the second move. It affects the third move. Anyone who plays chess knows that. Donald Trump hasn't played chess. Donald Trump doesn't know how to play chess. And our allies tonight even told me in meetings that because Donald Trump kept shifting his objectives.
Who was it?
Because Donald Trump, well, I'll tell you when the president tells us who he's negotiating with.
So you don't. So
when
so
the
you're
president
claiming
keeps
you had
moving our
high-level
objectives-
conversations with other countries tonight?
I talk to people from the region all the time,
The
Scott.
region or with the governments?
Scott, here's the point. Here's the point. The people in that region who are our allies have been very public about their frustration with the president's shifting objectives. And I'll tell you why. Because when you say you're going to go in and undertake regime change and a decapitation strike, you encourage your ally to throw it all out there. Donald Trump, if he'd approached this war differently, would not have instigated Iran to go attack our closest allies in the region, which they have done against civilian sites, against economic sites, that they would not likely have otherwise done if we had said, this is just about the ballistic missiles. This is just about
you're
the
saying
nuclear
if we
program.
had-
Do you remember when they
See,
struck
whoa, whoa,
the
whoa.
nuclear sites before?
You're saying-
we didn't see LNG facilities struck in the wake of that.
Because they didn't know we were there. We were gone before they ever knew we were there. So you're saying if we had sent
But
out...
we also
you're
annihilated
saying,
it, right?
You're saying if we had sent out the correct press release, the Iranians wouldn't have acted
No,
erratically?
I'm saying if the president of the
Come on,
United
brother.
States understood why he was
on.
there, we'd be able to achieve our objectives better.
He's got it.
I-
Get rid of the nukes, get rid of the missiles, get rid of the terrorism.
But the
It's been
reality is,
consistent from the beginning.
the American people aren't with your talking points. They are highly skeptical. They don't like the tactics. I think there is a way you can get to an outcome, but there are many pathways to this solution. And I don't know if the American people are with the president. And one reason why I don't think they're with the president is because it doesn't feel like he is being honest. I'll ask you the same question I asked Brad. From the time we did the strikes a couple weeks ago to today, do you feel like we've gotten the same story?
Yes, I feel like the objectives have
Then
been
you
clear
aren't
to me.
watching the news.
Because
Not the
nukes,
objectives,
missiles,
the story.
terror, Navy.
Navy.
It's been consistent time and again. POTUS, Rubio, Hegseth,
No, Rubio
Kaine.
said the
Nukes,
reason why we did it
missiles,
is
Navy,
because they were going to
terrorism.
strike Israel and then they would strike. I mean, you aren't watching the same news that we're all watching. That if you think the story
I
hasn't
mean, I come to the
changed.
same office you do. I watch plenty of news.
But they literally said, we're not going after nuclear sites. Like, just that one alone. Let's just hone in on that one.
His
That's not
red
true.
line-
What you
But
just said
wait a
wasn't
minute.
true,
for the
Scott.
entirety of Donald Trump's adult life, he has said,
We're talking about
Iran
this war
will
right now.
never have a nuclear weapon on my watch.
But we're talking about this war
Period.
right now. The nuke sites have not been a target in this war.
Here's where it all boils down to. This president had the guts to do something that was very difficult to take out an avowed enemy of the United States. When we saw President Obama do that with Syria, he backed away from his red line. His party didn't support him. The president's party has supported him. They will continue to support him as long as he's achieving worthy objectives in Iran and as long as this is quick. Which he still
The
indicates
elected
it'll be
officials
quick.
have supported him. Many people in your party are not supportive.
CNN's own
Now,
polling shows it's 99%.
You're not looking at the correct polling.
92% of Americans want this war to end as soon as humanly possible.
Agreed.
CBS News
I do
3
too.
days ago.
Everyone does.
We all
And I
want
want-
this
and
war
I
to
want
end
our
as
objectives
soon as
met.
humanly possible.
Everybody agrees
I
on
want
that.
our objectives met too. I want it done in a thoughtful way. This president did not approach this in a thoughtful way. He did not game it out.
How much
he
longer
didn't
should
even
we wait?
claim,
Another
he didn't
47
even claim,
years?
Scott, he didn't even claim he didn't think the Strait of Hormuz would be closed. You know
Okay.
where I saw that
So-
done? My grad school international relations class. We gamed that out, and that's what happened.
Well, first of all, the CNN reporting is a little bit more nuanced than what you posit, which is there is a difference between what we're prepared to do in terms of the war plans, which you are absolutely correct, and what officials thought, how far that they thought they would be willing to go. And this is playing into a number of other things, including questions about the Israelis seem to think that the Iranian people would go farther than they actually have been willing to go here. But Scott, I want to ask you this question as we wrap up here. Is it right or wrong? Should the United States of America be striking civilian energy infrastructure the way that Vladimir Putin has struck civilian power plants in Ukraine? Because that is what we are talking about here. That is something that the president put on the table. Right, wrong? Is that an American value?
We have to strike any targets necessary to achieve the objectives.
Including civilian
And-
targets that are
and
typically
The president,
proscribed.
and the president
in a
putting this,
conflict
and the
like this.
president putting on pause while we're apparently having conversations with somebody shows a real resistance to wanting or needing to do that. He knows whatever comes next, the country of Iran, you want it to rejoin Western civilization at some point. You don't want to have to decimate this. So I think his instinct is, Casey, what is under your question, which is you don't want to have to do that. And if you can get to a solution without having to do that, but at the same time, Iran is firing missiles intermittently into its allies or other countries in the region and saying, we're just going to strike all kinds of targets. So if you don't leave it on the table.
Look, Scott, this would not be the first American enemy that doesn't want to play by the rules of war that we set, but we set those rules of war to protect ourselves and to set an example for the world. That's why I'm asking the question.
I think
Joe Biden in 2007 said we're going to have to sacrifice to be able to get by for the next couple of years. He was talking about energy. So I do think that presidents on both sides of the aisle have asked that. I also don't think it's politically beneficial to ask that, especially with the midterms coming up. You know, Americans elected Donald Trump in large part to rewrite the economy that Joe Biden had wronged. And even before this war started, even though the metrics were trending in the right trajectory, you had a lot of Americans saying we're still not feeling the relief that we were promised. And people feel, and then they go out and they vote on what they feel. So that wasn't helping. And so I think to add this kind of messaging, it doesn't necessarily make Americans feel less concerned about the prospects heading into future weeks, which, again, to Noah's point, that's why the administration has to focus on better messaging. Give the American people something to make us feel hopeful.
You know what would make us feel hopeful? It might give them a little more credibility. If they also went to the wealthiest in the country and said, we're going to roll back some of the tax cuts that we've given you over the last few years so that you can put in and that we can all benefit, we can all sacrifice here. We're going to go to some of our contractors we've been giving $23 million sweetheart deals to and ask them to roll back some of the benefits that they've been getting from the Trump administration. I'm going to give back my $400 million airplane, or I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to put that in the pot. The president hasn't done anything to ask of his friends to put in the pot. They're only asking of the American people to pay more at the gas.
Okay, wait, really quickly, a few things. Trump doesn't take his salary, but he's made $4 billion on cryptocurrency. Also, I'm honestly kind of impressed at Donald Trump's handling of the economy so far. I'm impressed with what he's done with it. He's taken an economy that was steady-handed when Joe Biden was leaving.
Steady-handed? That's why Joe Biden lost.
Wait, what was the inflation rate when Joe Biden left?
I don't know. I just know that
it was 2.9%. We now have predictions that it's going to go up to 5%. We think that unemployment is going to keep skyrocketing due to this. Gas prices are skyrocketing. That means people have less money to spend on other things. I have a good idea too. Why don't we cut taxes for the richest so that we have less revenue coming in, and then we cut Medicaid for the poorest so that we can justify that, and then we go to war in the Middle East, so we increase our debt even further, even though we haven't learned from the fact that we added $8 trillion to our debt from the last Middle Eastern wars, and then we'll continue to pay $1 trillion per year on interest, so it compounds for our generation. That was obviously sarcasm.
So
that's not my actual.
the American people are clear that they think the economy is getting worse. 58% of them say that they think it's getting worse. 67% say that gas prices are going to go up. I do think one of the weird things about what's happening with Trump in this moment, even putting the war aside, is all the other things that are taking up his time. The ballroom, he went to a gala in the middle of a government shutdown when SNAP benefits were about to expire, renovating a bathroom. He was trying to have a UFC fight on the lawn of the White House. He wants to put a giant arch. I mean, he is worried about construction and renovation in Washington, D.C., while Americans are worried about the cost of things that they need to survive.
It's very hard to picture Donald Trump adopting the austere role of a wartime president. But it is nevertheless a very good point that he should be willing to embrace and adopt and characterize, espouse the sort of sacrifices that he's apparently and his administration are asking of the public. But I do think it's noble that they're asking the public on forthright terms to sacrifice. I don't think that's what Joe Biden did. And it's not what Joe Biden's policies were in February of 2022. By the way, when gas shot up a little bit higher than it is right now, Brent crude was about 122 when it popped, and it's right now 119, 120. It could get higher. But he didn't impose sanctions on Russian energy for fears of what it would do to the energy market, for fears of how the public would react electorally in crass political terms to the sacrifices that they might make to beat back the Russian onslaught on the continent. I just think the priorities were wrong. Again, if we were to really commit in February 2022 in Ukraine, when Ukraine had this masterful counteroffensive, pushing the Russians back from Kharkiv province, back to the borders that they practically occupy now, that we could have had a very different world on our hands. And what we're doing now is a policy to beat back an American adversary, one, by the way, that the American public really dislikes. Poll the Islamic Republic. It doesn't poll well.
I guess we should just make a note. I mean, I think your point of view is the point of view of some Republicans, but at the time, the actual history is that a lot of Republicans, including the current president and current vice president, opposed the United States doing more in Ukraine. They opposed it. So it wasn't like Joe Biden was not doing more and all these Republicans were pushing him to do more, including the current administration.
At the time,
That's
he
not
was
the
the president
case.
with total control of Congress. So the Republicans
but
were
the
irrelevant.
politics of it was that he was pushing the envelope in ways that could have been politically risky for him because people were running against him who were pushing for the opposite.
But not in February of 2022.
Well, and if you talk to people who were at the Treasury Department, what they would say, if you restricted more Russian oil, you would drive the price up. Russia would still sell oil in the black market, which would actually give them more money from the oil they sold than the money they had if you did it at the level
They
where
could
it
have done
was.
things like the Trump administration is doing, where seizing the tankers,
The idea
seizing
that
the
we
shadow fleet, and crushing
they want to
the Gulf
relieve and they
states,
want to
which is the
relieve
primary
sanctions
source.
on Russian oil, which the president said he wanted to do to help India, and
Not a
now they're
fan.
talking about relieving sanctions on Iranian oil. I'm not sure exactly what side of the fence these guys are on.
Getting into a war like this is why it's important when the framers created the Constitution that they vested the power to declare a war in Article 1. Article 1 addresses the legislator. And that was important to the founders because they wanted to make sure that people could enter war through their elected representatives. And here's why. They want to know a plan. They want to know why we should go to war. And that process should happen through people's individual elected representatives. So that's my first thought, is that we have no information because there's one person making all of the decisions and nobody knew about this, nobody was briefed on it, nobody was consulted for a plan. My second thought on this is just my own perspective from being in Iraq in 2016. And I've been on your show before, we've talked about during airstrikes. And I was in Iraq in 2016, 5 years after the United States had left Iraq. In 2011, President Obama at that point made the choice to withdraw. In the time frame between 2011 and 2014, a group called the Islamic State took over Iraq and Syria. And by 2014, they were about to seize the Baghdad airport. So we had to make the decision, the US had to make the decision to go back into Iraq. And so in 2016, facing the Islamic State, when I was there, I was actually working alongside commanders, generals, who were my people that I was with in the strike cell, who were now partnered with Iraqi National Army generals. Okay, so consider that perspective. These are the people that during the 2003 invasion, these American commanders had actually been fighting. They were targeting. And yet in 2016, because we didn't properly plan, in my opinion, and we left this country basically to an ungoverned populace that was sort of wreaked with war, the result is that in 2016, you had the Iraqi National Army and the United States partnered together in order to try to root out a very dangerous organization.
And a new danger that perhaps was not anticipated
Not
at the beginning. That, I guess, is always the possibility here. I mean, there are lots of possibilities, including unintended consequences, if we do decide, as the president seems to suggest, that, okay, we have these limited objectives, they're met up until a certain point that he has decided, but then we pull out, and then what? You've got the Iranian regime that is wounded, but still largely intact, according to Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence. What happens then when they're still in charge? They're still going to be trying to wreak havoc all around the world.
Every single day this war is waged, the world becomes an inherently more dangerous place. We're helping our enemies, like Russia, get more money by lifting sanctions. We're helping Iran have more money by lifting sanctions. You know more about Iraq than me, obviously, but I did some research. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq,
Yes.
3 times the military, and twice the population. So I see 2 likely scenarios in which this plays out. Either Trump does go boots on the ground, which he's being kind of weird out, but he's currently sending troops to the Middle East, so we don't know. If he does do that, it'll be almost impossible to invade a country like Iran. The geography means that mountains are on all borders, and it would be almost an impossible invasion, which would result in thousands of troops dying. So the other scenario is that Trump backs off and looks for an off-ramp. Well, what did we get from this? We made Iran more extreme. Khamenei's 86-year-old father is now replaced by the 30-year-old younger son, who is more extreme, more radical. The moderates in this country are being purged. The IRGC is becoming more radical. So what do we get for this? Either a more radical Iranian regime that will continue to fight, or we got boots on the ground. There's no, I don't know.
Let me play what Trump said about who, if anybody, there is to talk to in Iran.
Their leaders are all gone. The next set of leaders are all gone. And the next set of leaders are mostly gone. And now nobody wants to be a leader over there anymore. We're having a hard time. We want to talk to them, and there's nobody to talk to. We have nobody to talk to. And you know what? We like it that way.
Is that really the plan, Hogan? No one to talk to? How does this war end then?
Well, I mean, look, I think Donald Trump has been pretty obvious on what he wanted to accomplish on the front end of this, and I think he's done a pretty good job executing that. The military, for all of its incredible lethality, has been showcased as one of the most surgical, strategic entities on the face of the planet with what they've been able to accomplish under Donald Trump's administration. This operation, no different. As Donald Trump has pointed out many times, not only did he completely eradicate any potential for Iran to create a nuclear weapon, he also destroyed their ballistic missile capability, which of course is vital to safety and security around the globe, but also in that region. In addition, he has prevented them now from carrying out other terrorist activities through proxies around the globe too, not to mention the fact destroyed their Navy. So this administration has done things that both Republican and Democrat presidents have talked about for a long time. Both Republican and Democrat candidates for president, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, all said Iran can't get a nuclear weapon. Also, Barack Obama said that as well. Who's going to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon? Donald Trump has done that here. And I would argue, antithetical to this one here, this world is a whole lot safer without a nuclear-capable Iran than ever before.
I mean, gas prices are spiking, oil prices are spiking. It's not safer for people.
That's a different conversation to have. You're talking about safety and security around the globe. This president, not only
Wait a minute. Safety and security around the globe. Is Russia getting more money secure? Is Iran getting more money, making us more secure? Yes or no?
All right. In the first administration,
yes or no?
this president was able to get peace deals in the Middle East.
We're talking about now. He's starting wars
and
now.
now. In this administration, he's preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
8 months
That's
ago
better
or now?
for the entire,
8 months ago or
entire
now?
world.
Safer because of this war, in your view?
In some ways, I'll be very balanced about it. In some ways, their military capability has been degraded. I'm sure they're on the run, and so in some ways. But in other ways, I think we're less safe because the economies are more uncertain. And I want to give the president some due here. And, you know, I'm often very critical of the president. He said something there that people should listen to. He was looking for a secularist to do a deal with, and they killed all the secularists. And so the question is, at what point did that happen, and when did it happen, and when was that divergence? Because it sort of feels like the Israelis killed the secularists in terms of what the president is saying. So we're safer in some ways. I'll give Hogan some credit for that. But I would say that generally, this didn't need to happen. I don't think anybody around the president thought it needed to happen. And it was reported that Bessent, Gabbard, Vance were all put in the Situation Room and away from Mar-a-Lago. So there was dissent inside of his own administration in terms of the war. And if I could just ask Hogan a question, you guys campaigned on no more forever wars. And so this is the definition of a forever war.
Did President Trump underestimate Iran and the impact of this war? Well, today, while encouraging allies to join the U.S. to secure the Strait of Hormuz, this is how he described Iran.
We strongly encourage the other nations to get involved with us and get involved quickly and with great enthusiasm. I have that from a number of them, and I'd like to say their names, but frankly, I don't know if they would want me to or not, because maybe they don't want to be targeted. But I say, wouldn't matter if you're targeted or not, because this is a paper tiger that we're dealing with now. It wasn't a paper tiger 2 weeks ago. It's a paper tiger now.
He even acknowledged that Iran's retaliation against neighboring countries took him by surprise.
Look what happened. In the last 2 weeks, they weren't supposed to go after all these other countries in the Middle East. Those missiles were set to go after them. So they hit Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. Nobody expected that. We were shocked.
To that point, earlier tonight, the United Arab Emirates temporarily closed its airspace due to continued Iranian attacks. And the attacks continue. We were just talking earlier in the show about what's happening in Baghdad. And look, Iran is definitely weakened, but as we've been talking about, it seemed like they underestimated Iran. Trump just admitted it today. And that underestimation seems to be at the heart of why we're still in this and how this potentially ends.
I didn't hear underestimation there. I hear musing. And I wish the president would muse a little bit less than he does. I think maybe 3 times a week instead of
I don't know
4
if
or 5
we were watching the
times a day.
same clip, Brad.
But I think that the president knew that he could go in and take out Iran's military capability. That's the foremost objective. He's doing that. The Israelis may have longer game ambitions than we do here. He may have fewer ambitions than I might have there. But I think the main play for America's strategic interest is to take Iran's military capability out of play.
Look, he says paper tiger. I think they cut the head off of the serpent and outflew the hornets. And this asymmetric war that we're in now is not one that we can fight easily and well. Yes, we are wiping the floor with them when it comes to everything conventional. I mean, it's embarrassing. They're just getting their butts kicked there. But they're not going to surrender because they can take a little cheap drone and knock out a tanker. They can take a little cheap drone and knock out targets that are softer than we can easily defend. The economics are starting to be pretty bad because it takes so much, it's so expensive to defend against all these drones and all these strikes. And so I do think that there was an underestimation here. I think he thought that because we can beat them conventionally, they would give up or they would come to the table. They're not coming to the table. They're moving into unconventional warfare. And I think the only way out of this is for us to get some leverage that we don't have right now and try to get to terms with the Iranians.
I think he thought he could replicate the Venezuela model. Trump has what a friend of mine calls Venezuela derangement syndrome. He thinks he could do that in Venezuela, regime change there, which he hasn't. The regime was intact but for Maduro, who was on the head of it. He is negotiating with them. He thought he could get the same result out of Iran. He thinks he can get the same result out of Cuba now. It is very disconcerting. And my heart goes out to each one of those communities and each one of those nations. As somebody who fled communism, I know the Venezuelans have been trying for 25 years to get rid of Maduro. They haven't been able to. The Iranians have been trying for 47 years. The Cubans have been trying for 67 years, almost 70 years. But Trump seems to be starting something without having finished what he started before. I want to know what the end game is in Venezuela, because keeping Maduro's vice president there and the guy who was executing and torturing Venezuelans, Diosdado Cabello, to me is not an acceptable result. Keeping the Cuban regime, who's got political prisoners, who has been executing people for 67 years, is not an acceptable result. So it just, to him, what he just thinks is, okay, I'll make them cry uncle. I will keep these communists or these people there. They will negotiate with me. I will, be able to bully them and get whatever I want, and then everything will be fine.
Well, he basically said as much today. Here's what he said about Cuba when he was asked about whether Cuba is next.
I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth? They're a very weakened nation right now.
They are.
Cuba, look, nobody is, very few people, I shouldn't say nobody, because there are some people out there who are crying for the former Castro regime, but very few people are. And everybody wants to see a free, prosperous Cuba, Venezuela, Iran. But I also wonder broadly about Trump's view of the world and what he can just take, what he can just invade, who he can topple, and where does that end?
Yeah, and it sounds like what Trump wants is he wants these quick wins. He wants to be able to celebrate, and he wants people to praise him for some wins, what he will call regime change, and then he doesn't follow through on them. And the reality that we're seeing now is that he keeps on talking about how he has obliterated their nuclear capabilities. We don't want them to have nuclear weapons. And the reality is, though, that the regime is still intact and they will rebuild, and they are angrier than ever, and they have every reason, and they will try as much as they can to come back from what has already happened. And so these quick wins, while they might be great headlines for the time being, he doesn't have real plans to get out of these places or to actually have regime change in these places. And he hasn't presented those plans to Congress, to the American people, to our allies overall.
And whatever happened to not being the policeman of the world? There are a lot of problems in the world.
There are.
A lot of them.
And
we can't solve them all.
I mean, this is a very fascinating sort of development with the president. Traditionally, this is almost like an old school Republican position of the role of the United States and our pro-democracy, spreading freedom and peace around the globe. Now, a lot of MAGA folks would criticize some of that old school orthodoxy, but I'm happy to see this. I agree with Anna's point about Venezuela. I wanted to see more. In Iran, for example, I don't think it's enough to have operational successes. Our military certainly has been successful in that regard. But the next phase of the strategy, in my opinion, has to be to remove the regime. The people there are suffering. We have an obligation as the powerfulest country in the world to do that, to spread that freedom. The alternative is a vacuum that's created when we withdraw that I can promise you will be filled by the Chinese. And so I think there are some long-term strategies here that I believe that the president is starting to recognize the importance of these things. Now, can you be all over the place spreading our military too far? Absolutely not. You got to pick a place. You got to be prepared for the long game. But I think there are some things that are absolutely necessary, Abby, to maintain the current world order that exists, that is under grave threat by a lot of developments that we're seeing from the Chinese that we don't talk enough about.
Well, I think that all sounds good in theory, but when we create a bunch of conflicts around the world, it seems, and we don't have the ability to see them all the way through, that seems to me exactly the kind of vacuum
I don't know that I would say that
is a problem.
That in Cuba it's created by Trump. The people who have the most blame for what's happening in Cuba is the Cuban government that for 67 years has been corrupt and getting rich while the people
I think
are
it's a
suffering.
question of if Trump were to use U.S. military force or pressure to decapitate the government in Cuba, and we are not in a position to see through a full political transition, what happens then?
What he's doing now is using U.S. military pressure to basically starve them and have them in an incredible suffering. Yeah. What's happening in Cuba is unsustainable. And we do have some responsibility because we are responsible for having cut off their supplies of oil. Right now, they have zero electricity. They can't get food. Tourism is at zero. I mean, there is great suffering, a humanitarian crisis going on there. And whatever we're going to do there, we got to do it quick because people are going to die.
Isn't that what Trump ran on? I mean, he's already plussed up the DOD budget by 50%, $1.5 trillion for the fiscal year, and now $200 billion on top of that?
So first, what I'd say, fundamentally, the role of the government is to protect and defend its citizens. And the artificial intelligence, the weaponry that we're deploying is astonishing in what we're able to accomplish. That costs a lot of money, and it's also part of the reason that I think fewer men have lost their lives in this conflict. What I'd also say is that it's interesting that now Democrats are outraged about spending money on war. We spent $175 billion on Ukraine, a war we weren't even in. Nancy Pelosi rallied for it, said that it was a victory for democracy. Well, and everyone was thrilled to spend that again on Ukraine. Why not in Iran, a war that we're already in supporting?
Not in 1 year. Most of that money, a portion of that money, about 40% of it, hasn't even been spent. What you're talking about.
But this is a
3-week conflict that they have already. They've only told us they've spent $11 billion in 6 days. Now they're asking for $200 billion. I think it's not just Democrats, but it's Republicans asking. That's a burn ratio that is enormous, even for expensive conflicts.
War makes strange bedfellows. You know, Ruben Gallego and Lauren Boebert. I'm quoting Tulsi Gabbard. Like, you know, things are going weird in 2026 for sure. But you have to ask yourself the question: if Trump says the war is going to end very soon, then what's the $200 billion for? Because if the war is going to end very soon, then it doesn't cost $200 billion. And he gave us a hint. He said, I want you to fund the next war. What's that one? Oh, it's Cuba. What are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to take Cuba. What does that mean? Don't worry about it. And
Don't
that's
you think
what.
maybe we don't want to
can you
telegraph to
imagine?
the enemy our exact timeline? Don't
We're
you
not
think we
even
want to
telling.
signal
Trump,
to
Trump's
them
not telegraphing
that we
to
don't have
himself.
enough money?
I wish they would at least tell the president, because he doesn't seem to know how long this is going to take.
The problem is that MAGA stands for absolutely nothing. And let that radiate headlines across social media and everything else. You talk about America first, but you have people out here who cannot make ends meet. You have prices at the tank skyrocketing daily. You have American soldiers dying. And then you have the audacity to tell congresspersons that they're supposed to come back and vote for a $200 billion supplemental for a war we don't know how we're going to get out of, how much it's going to cost, or how many lives are going to be used and die as a result of something with no objectives. And so, yeah, I'm
and then another war to be named later. Can we just take a one beat on taking Cuba? Does anyone care that we're going to take Cuba?
Well, let's let Scott answer your question or respond to all of that. Go ahead, Scott.
A few things. Number one, I made a few phone calls to Capitol Hill tonight to some senior Republicans. I do think the president's going to get some support. I talked to Mitch McConnell, actually. He is the chairman of the Defense Subcommittee on Appropriations. He's going to support the president on it. A member of leadership told me they hadn't gotten the details. Nothing formal had been submitted, but it was going to get a thorough review. And in the House, interestingly, there's been a debate going on in the Republican conference about whether to do a reconciliation package, and they may use this supplemental request to jumpstart that. So it may not just be a defense supplemental that gets voted on. It could be other things that would be part of a larger.
Sure, but let me just add to that. Look, listen.
You're gonna have Lindsey.
Listen. Be that as it may, the Republicans have a razor-thin majority in the House. So you've got Lauren Boebert. Here's Chip Roy asking, "What are we doing?" We're talking about boots on the ground. We're talking about the kind of extended activity. They got a whole lot more briefing and a whole lot more explaining to do on how we're going to pay for it and what's the mission here. Thomas Massey says it begs the question, how long do they plan to be there? What are the goals? Is the first 200 billion, is this the first 200 billion? Does it turn into $1 trillion? So they have some hurdles to climb,
yes.
and rightfully so, because $200 billion, just to be clear, is a lot of money. The Afghanistan war, $825 billion over 20 years, okay? 20 years.
So they asked this year for $28 billion extra to pay for munitions. So, and we did need to improve the defense industrial base, but now we have gotten ourselves into so much more of a hole that we have to ask for $200 billion more. Now, I am not a peacenik here in any way. I think that we need to be prepared for war. And this war is making us less prepared for the real threats that we have. It's a war of choice, in my view. And we have just expended unbelievable amounts of the exact same weapons that we need to protect ourselves from China. So we're in this huge hole now. I don't know if it's a 200 billion hole, but just yesterday, the U.S. debt reached $39 trillion. By October 1, it will be $40 trillion. By doing this, we are adding to our huge budget deficit and our huge debt, and this is
the
a
vast
war of
majority
choice.
of that is because of entitlements. Like, let's be
No,
very
majority
clear.
not necessarily. It's also from but also Lydia, it's from tax cuts that have not been paid for since the Bush administration. It's from spending that has not been paid for by either Republican or Democrat administrations.
I mean,
it's from
the
entitlement. It's from entitlement reform that has.
$500 billion.
Hold on. It's from entitlement
on fraud
reform that has. We are talking about trillions of dollars.
I'm
We're not talking about billions of dollars. We are talking about trillions of dollars. We're talking about more. We're talking about more in interest payments.
Here at play.
We are talking about more in interest payments than anything else that we pay for. So again, she's making a good point that when we have, as a nation, choosing what we do with our money, that's what Lauren Boebert's talking about. That's what Donald Trump, by the way, was talking about when he ran for president in 2016. And he said we should be spending our money at home, not on regime change in the Middle East. Literally last year in the Middle East, he went to Saudi Arabia and he talked about no more regime change. And what a year it has been, because here we are ousting Venezuela. We are trying to engage in regime change in Iran and maybe in Cuba too. Are there principles? I'm going to go back to Bakari's question. Let me go back to Bakari's question.
We didn't change the regime in Iran either.
Are there MAGA principles, or is it just what Donald Trump feels like doing on any given day?
Well, if you ask Donald Trump, he's called out Marjorie Taylor Greene and people who disagree with him, saying, I am MAGA. So that's his definition. MAGA is very supportive of this war. And it's really a following of Donald Trump.
But
He invented it.
Tangibly, one of the things we talked about in the break, and tangibly, I just want to highlight this because I think it's important, is you have farmers right now because of this war that are paying a higher price for fertilizer. And you know more about this than I do. And diesel, right? And so we're not talking about some esoteric ideal, right? And when you have people just a month ago, we were on this show arguing about subsidies, year-long subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, so people could have access to health care, right? So that we could actually fill gaps in Medicaid, so that we could expand health care, those type of ideals. But then you tell me that we have enough money to fund a war that we're not sure objectively how we get out of it.
So I would like to see more clear messaging for the White House. I would like to see him address the American people. We can go to commercial break now. What I also want to say, though, is I speak with a lot of folks in the defense tech space. This is really a strategic moment when we talk about the adoption of AI. China is looking at exactly what we're doing, and so they see this as an investment. We're trying to reshore more manufacturing facilities here to the U.S. so we can produce more as a deterrent. So I would say this is sort of a seminal moment when you think about technology and defense, and I think it's important in this time.
For sure.
To make that investment
For sure. But are we starting a war so that we can reconstitute our AI industrial?
China is watching what
You
we're
are
doing.
right about this. This is a seminal strategic moment, and what I worry about is at the end of this, the countries that are benefiting the most from this are Russia and China. And that's the thing. It's like the second and third order unintended consequences, and this happens no matter what your foreign policy is. The world is connected, it's hard. But unintended consequences here is that Russia, President Trump was, in my view, very, very bold in finally taking a step that Biden wasn't willing to do in actually sanctioning the oil and the gas from Russia. And guess what? At the beginning of this year, their oil sales revenue went down 50% because of what President Trump did. Now they're getting such a windfall that they will make up for what they were going to lose, plus much, much more.
Obviously, you should be concerned when the director of the National Counterterrorism Center quits over a war that you're in the middle of from the largest state-sponsored terrorism in the world. At the same time, the things he said, the idea that Israel stoked this war, that we had gotten into this war because Israel pushed us into it. I mean, Donald Trump is not the kind of guy to get pushed into a war. He may be a lot of things. That is not what he is. Beyond that, he also had this underlying sentiment. He talked about his wife who had been killed in the Iraq war, suggested that Israel had pulled us into that war either. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. I think this underlines some of the ties that Joe Kent had to other people and some of his underlying views that are animating why he quit. Also notable, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, very careful about how she positioned herself, endorsing the war, but saying it's because the president gets to decide what an imminent threat is, not endorsing it herself, though.
She says, as our commander-in-chief, Trump, is responsible for determining what is and is not an imminent threat. President Trump concluded that the terrorist Islamic regime in Iran posed an imminent threat, and he took action based on that conclusion. It's very notable also, she does not say that she supports the war. She just said it was Trump's decision.
Right, but this is a very complicated thing. This guy has said some anti-Semitic things. At the very same time, which is problematic, full stop. At the very same time, soon after the war started, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said that the imminent threat was that we knew that that if Iran was attacked, and we believed that it would be attacked by Israel, that they would immediately come after us. And that was the immediate threat that they used as a rationale for the war. So both things are operating at the same time. This guy is very problematic because he has anti-Semitic sentiments. At the very same time, the administration, that was their first rationale for the war, was that they thought that Israel was going to strike first, that Iran would strike back, and they would strike us when they struck back, and that would precipitate a wider conflict, and we would have consequences from that.
But there's one point that I think is important in that Marco Rubio was part of all of the intelligence briefings on this, and Joe Kent was not. So Marco Rubio had access to everything that Joe Kent did not have access to. What was also left out of that letter was Joe Kent's plans now, I suppose, to be part of this resistance, go on podcasts that have been very critical of Israel. This is someone who, over the course of the next few days, you'll see more reporting on how he was seen as a chief leaker in this White House. And that goes to some of the problems I have with some folks who are now amplifying Joe Kent as if they agree with him or as if they suddenly believe that he is someone to be trusted on
Donald
these
Trump
issues.
amplified Joe Kent because he put him in charge of the National Counterterrorism Center. And in addition to that,
if he was a
ran for
leaker and if he was bad on national security, why leave somebody in a sensitive, important job like that if you thought that he was disloyal, leaking, and he was bad on the substance of the thing that he was in charge of?
We're assuming that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is an important job. I mean, it's kind of a bureaucratic, nowheresville. Yeah, I'm torn on Joe Kent because on the one hand, he did primary and defeat a colleague and friend of mine, Jamie Herrera Butler, in 2022. On the other hand, he has a decorated career as a Green Beret, as a CIA paramilitary officer. He lost his wife, Shannon, in 2019 in Syria. He's a Gold Star husband. I give him the benefit of the doubt on the reasons for his resignation in this case. I think the question of whether or not a resignation, should have been public is one thing. I think it is right and appropriate if you do not feel you can, faithfully execute and support the policies of administration you're working for. You should resign. That is the appropriate thing to do in the natural course. I have more questions about the statement that Tulsi Gabbard put out because on the one hand, it was a masterclass in saying something without saying anything at all. On the other hand, you're going before Congress tomorrow.
She has not been seen or heard of in months, probably for this exact reason, because we're at war with Iran. And she has explicitly said she did not believe that we should be at war with Iran.
And has been on record saying it for years. So let's not act as though this is a new thing with this administration. She has been on record for quite some time through multiple administrations, voicing her opinion against going to war with Iran for the exact same reasons that many of the individuals who the Trump administration fired regarding Iranian intelligence, those individuals were against it as well. I think that with Kent, it's important to recognize, and it's a good point that I believe Charles made earlier, this is a guy who's looking at his career path after this. He's also somebody who understands the MAGA fissures. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who aligned around Trump in 2016 and 2020 and in 2024 who did it almost solely because this man talked about no more endless wars. These are individuals who watched what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. These are individuals who trusted that he was going to put America first, meaning we're not going and creating wars and chaos in other places, and recognize fully that their young men and women in the armed forces may be up next. As we can recall, just a week ago, his press secretary did not leave it off the table that the possibility of a draft could happen, which wild, by the way. This is a president who has not stood by the very thing that he ran on. And many people are seeing this as problematic, but are also questioning the allegiance with Israel because it does seem that there's some puppeteering going on backstage. And that's not anti-Semitic. That is just a question that they have because they also recognize
usually when you bring up Israel, and I don't think your intention was that, but usually when people talk about puppeteering and Jews, it's clear anti-Semitic.
But let me just ask, what she's raising is, can there be substance to a criticism that Netanyahu, as he has said himself, pushed Trump personally to engage in this operation, and that might not be in the best interest of the United States? I mean, is that not a valid thing?
I think it's a valid conversation. I view, I guess, that as someone making the case, and the president looked at it and said, yeah, based on the case that you're making and what we're seeing on the ground in our intel, I believe that this is the right move. I mean, he could have made the exact same argument and said, no, I disagree. I mean, that is normal. That's what happens in healthy relationships with allies.
And how do you square it with what Marco Rubio said, which is, to Charles's point, that was the first thing that Marco Rubio said when he was explaining why we were at war in the first place.
But this idea that Israel just attacks without checking with the U.S. and makes decisions without checking with the U.S., We are their strongest ally. They don't move without checking with us first. This idea that they were gonna attack without checking with the president, and then that we were going to be drawn in.
Hey,
By the way,
I didn't say that. That was Marco Rubio who said
well,
that.
also,
That's the whole thing. It came from inside the administration. So the people who made the suggestion that Israel was going to go no matter what, that was this administration.
That may be the case, but the point remains that we watched this thing play out. Israel had attacked Iran before. They attacked Iran before we ran an Operation Midnight Hammer. Iran attacked back. They did not come after us. We then decided to go on an Operation Midnight Hammer. This is a war that the President of the United States chose to go into. That's his decision, his call. He can listen to allies or not. But this idea somehow that Israel drew us into that, they drew us into Syria. We were in Syria because of ISIS, okay? Because of the conduct of that war. It had nothing to do with Israel. Joe Kent's theory of the case is clear in his resignation letter. This is not about him quitting because he's got some big dispute with this Iran war. By the way, if he'd wanted to quit because of the Iran war, he could have quit 3 weeks ago. He waited a long time. Joe Kent, I predict, is running for office again. He's going to go on Tucker Carlson's show tomorrow, the same show, or this next week, the same show that put Nick Fuentes on the air. He's expressed those same views, and he's going to get support from that toxic part of the Republican Party that is both anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim and spouts all the kind of rhetoric that we as Americans should be disgusted with.